Welcome back, everyone. Michael here. Last year, about a year ago, at the start of the year, I made a series of predictions about what would happen in the world. Actually, I made what I thought was a pretty fun video, so you can go and check it out. I talked not just about predictions, but also about some basic mental models for understanding how the world works and trying to make predictions and figuring out why people are so bad at predictions, because generally we suck at making predictions, which is one of the things that I'd mentioned. I said it is extremely dangerous. The consequences are not dangerous, but the probability of success is low in my sitting there making predictions. So in that sense, it's dangerous. I'm likely to be wrong. So I wanted to kind of in full accountability and transparency. Yes, the video's out there and people can go and rewatch it, etc. I'm not going to delete it or something like that. But I wanted to go over and discuss what I got right, what I got wrong, why, and kind of look at it in retrospect. I will not do too much in the way of predictions right at the moment in this video. I may do a kind of prediction video in the future, but I'll touch on a few different things related to the things that I talked about there. So let's dive in and find out what it was that I predicted and just how wrong I was. So let's get started. Before we do that, if you haven't already, thank you for being here. Welcome. I am Michael from Offshore Citizen. We are some of the foremost international tax and relocation specialists, so we can help you with building international structures for your business or yourself, helping you to figure out what country to relocate to, personal customized solutions just for you. There is no one size fits all. Everything that you do in terms of your business, your taxes, your life, where you live, etc., should be tailored to you because you are a unique individual. There's a ton of different stuff out there. And so do not fall into the groupthink of hearing somebody say, oh, I moved to, X and hey, I have a company in Hong Kong and I have this. That might be great for that person. It might be bad. They might have made a mistake, but it might be wrong for you, even if it is right for them. So if you're interested in getting personalized advice and help with any of those things, please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so let's see here. The first prediction that I made last year was correct, which was that the war in Ukraine would not end. At the time, I said I figured the incentives were not aligned such that that would happen. And I talked about a variety of different things, such as trends continuing on and stuff like that. So certainly I was correct on that. So this is great. I will, complain of whiplash later for patting myself on the back so hard. Anyway, I would say that it is possible that, so I'm not going to make a prediction of whether, I think that last year it was pretty obvious to do that. And I would say this about in general making predictions. Generally speaking, the key to being right at making predictions is to make obvious predictions. So, and I don't say that, okay, they may not be obvious to some people, et cetera, but if you're choosing high probability events, like I had different comments from people and some people saying, I was out to lunch and inflation would be way higher than it would be, or that I was saying it would be, and things like this. I think that you don't want to be contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. That's not a smart thing to do. You have to kind of just sort of observe the way that the world is, and you have to understand that in most things, we aren't very sure, right? We just don't have a high degree of certainty about most things. And it behooves us to start with, I don't know. So one of the basic things my wife will come and ask me about, hey, what do you think will happen with this person, this person? I'm like, I have no idea. No idea at all. Very, very important to start out with, I don't know, and will also be skeptical as a default position. So I'm a big fan of the line from Richard Feynman, which is Feynman, however you pronounce it. Anyway, the line is, the most important rule is not to fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. So really, really important to be aware of our kind of blind spots, etc. So usually the idea, minimize the kind of low probability events in our analysis and instead focus on high probability events. And then we're more likely to be right in those predictions. And that might mean giving up some ego because we have to admit that we don't know, but most things we just don't know. So when it comes to the war in Ukraine, will it end this year? I don't know. Will it end next year? I don't know. I do think that things have fundamentally changed this year, and I do think that there's a possibility that in the next 2 years, the probability is probably quite a bit higher at this point in time that in the next 2 years the war will end. And part of that is just the political pressure, largely from the US. It's becoming less popular. If Trump gets in, he's certainly stated that he wants to end the war. And so I think whether Zelensky will go along with that and whether they'll be able to make things work, I think at this stage it appears as though there isn't progress being made, and so the incentives are no longer there. A lot of people are not happy about supporting the war anymore in terms of the financial commitment from Western countries. They're running out of ammunition, kind of just crazy things like that. And so I do think there's a much more elevated possibility that the war ends sometime in the next 24 months. We'll see. Hopefully it does. But that being said, I'm not sufficiently certain in order to make a prediction like that. The next thing was I said inflation sub 5% by June. I was very right about that. And again, I kind of gave the logic in the video. Some people were telling me, no, you're crazy, inflation is high. And I think people have kind of the wrong mental models about inflation. That's a whole topic I've talked about a bunch. I'm going to produce a bunch of papers and information kind of explaining a model of inflation, because I think almost nobody understands inflation. It's really, really poorly understood. And so they come to the wrong conclusions. And what I kind of just did last year was I basically looked at the roll-off effects. I showed the chart on the video. You can go and check it out. And you can just do the math. It was like highly likely that that was going to happen. People were sort of, I think, bringing their biases into analysis if they were saying otherwise. One of the things that I will say now is I think there's a lot of recency bias. I posted about this on Twitter recently, saying that inflation, because it was recently a big thing, people are thinking a lot about it. And the truth is that it was sort of an abnormal event caused by mainly an unusual set of circumstances. It doesn't mean it can't happen again. It doesn't mean that you can't have, some moderate level of inflation or something like that. Certainly you will have at least some moderate level over a long period of time. That tends to be what happens. But it is highly likely that people's fixation on inflation is a function of recency bias. So really, as early as the middle of the summer, you should have basically just said, it's just a non-conversation. Inflation is just not a conversation you should be worrying about right now, because that's not likely to be the big thing. The big thing is likely to be something that you don't see coming. And so the question is, what is that? What do I predict about inflation in the future? I don't know. It's at the point where it could easily go slightly up or slightly down. It's just at that stage where it's not easy to predict anymore. It was easy to predict when I made the prediction. It's not easy to predict anymore. We don't make a prediction about it. So that's the way that it goes. The Fed won't raise rates, but they will pause. I was right about this. So I actually bet a friend an expensive bottle of wine. We had kind of a little bet. He said, Fed will cut before at the end of the year. I said, no, they will not. And we did this. I mean, it's just kind of fun to put a bottle of wine on it, because the reality is we'll buy each other the bottle of wine regardless. So it makes no difference. But it's a fun thing to do, not because of the fact that we will be right or we will be wrong. He and I will frequently do this game with each other where we say, like, okay, make a prediction. What do you think on this? Not about what the prediction is, but more about what is the reasoning behind it, so then you can analyze the reasoning in the future. And so turns out I won the bottle of wine in this case, so that's fun. Again, what will the Fed do in the coming year? I don't know. I think that probably markets are overly optimistic about the rate or the how soon and how fast rates will be cut. My guess is that that's probably not going to be the case. But what do I know? This is like, again, I think there was a time when it was fairly obvious, and I think how obvious that is no longer obvious. So, it depends what will happen. It could easily go either way. They kind of have the leeway at this point to cut, and it's just a question of like, okay, at what level do they feel that will happen? I think you need to have something fairly major happen to the negative in order to get deep cuts rapidly. And I don't see a lot of signs of anything imminent, which is truly negative, going to take things down aggressively. And so, in the recent of like over the next 3 months, could they bring something down a bit? Yeah, they could. Just like they might say, okay, inflation is down a bit, so we're going to lower it a bit. Okay, like their just hands aren't tied at this point in time. So who knows what will happen in that regard. Next thing, risk on assets will rally but not sustain. Was I right about this? So in that video, I said I will sell that rally. And so full disclosure, I was kind of believing that we'd have this echo bubble in crypto, and I was pretty aware of this echo bubble thing. And the truth is, a bunch of things I did not sell. So I looked at a bunch of things, And they rallied up a bunch, and I thought, should I sell? I think they could go higher. Let me not sell. And then I had to wait them out. And so anyway, I missed out on some extra profits. This is a really good lesson for me, which is, hey, listen, you can be right about the general idea and direction, and yet not execute properly on it. And I've noticed this a lot in investing. It's something that a person has to pay quite a bit of attention to. So it's something that I am, kind of feeling out in general, but it's not easy to make those decisions in real time. So certainly it was true. We had this echo bubble. Things went up, they went down, didn't sustain, and then kind of went up again, and some of them have not sustained. And it just kind of depends on which one. So risk-on assets have generally, I'd say, been choppy, more or less fits with the thesis. Back, not this past summer, but the summer before that, I made the comment that I expected generally sideways markets as being the highest paying thing for the next little while. And so I've been investing a lot based on that thesis. So a lot of my money over the last little while has been going into high cash flow investments. I do hold, as I've mentioned on this channel a bunch of small caps that I think have high growth potential over a 10-year period. I hold quite a lot of crypto, and those things are all kind of risk on. So I have kind of a mixture in a portfolio. But this being said, that was something. I would say that a lesson learned for me in this process was probably to be more aggressive in risk on when things were really down. There was a bunch of cases where I invested, but I certainly could have invested more heavily, and I was sort of risk averse. And realistically, you should be optimally risk averse when things are up and optimally risk on when things are down. But psychologically and emotionally, that doesn't necessarily feel so good. So anyway, I did well. It was fine, but I certainly could have done much better if I had played that a little more wisely. And so that's a lesson for me to learn. So anyway, is what it is. Next, this one I was super wrong on, I would say. Offshore will not have much change. A few new programs and few programs closing. I would argue I was quite wrong about this. What did we have? I did a video previously about a bunch of tax changes. We had the Portuguese Golden Visa, having some serious changes. We had programs in the Caribbean having a bunch of different changes related to them. We had just like a bunch of stuff change. So I would argue that in general, I was pretty wrong on that subject. Why was I wrong on that? It's quite interesting. I don't think that there was inherently a lot of reason for me to make that prediction. It was kind of like just a mean reversion type prediction. And one of the things that I guess I failed to account for in doing that is the idea that trends tend to keep going longer than you might expect them to. And so that was certainly one that I would say was fairly off. I predicted biggest winners, AI startups. This was, again, I think quite obvious and more or less true. You could pick some random. You could say, okay, well maybe NVIDIA and more established companies also did really well. That's true. I would say that I underestimated how much the big players would just rally off of this. But anyway, that was what it was. I would say that a guess that I have for this coming year is the Magnificent Seven radically outperformed the S&P 790 or 493. I would expect mean reversion there. I would expect that kind of a long the 493, short the S&P or the Magnificent Seven probably is a reasonable spread trade, but I'm not sufficiently confident to make that trade. So I have very specific things that I would consider buying at this point in time, and I wouldn't feel confident to short any of those big Magnificent Seven companies. And so, yeah, I would say that my expectation is that you'll have some closing in that gap because that gap is just kind of ridiculous, but not sufficient confidence in order to do a spread bet on that, not sufficient confidence in order to short on those big players. I wouldn't do that. An area that I think has certainly been very oversold, and I made some reasonable calls on the timing of, but at some point probably we'll have a bit of a reverse rally, and it's unclear to me how much or how soon, is Chinese tech. So Chinese tech is very sold down, and The amount of foreign direct investment which has been going into China has been just dropped off a cliff. It's gone to like nothing, been obliterated. So at some point, it's just like you can only sell so far down. Somebody made a comment that I thought was pretty wise in markets, which is that you don't necessarily need new money entering the market or good news in order for things to get better. You just need sellers to stop selling. And that's just selling exhaustion. So at some point, I would expect that you have to see selling exhaustion in these companies. So I took positions in 3 or 4 major kind of Chinese companies over the last while. They're small bets. I'm generally not bullish on China long term, but I also think that something that is not necessarily extraordinary can still do well because it's oversold. And so, by the way, that's not a statement that I'm not bullish on the management or something of those companies. I just think that there are fundamental structural issues that make it difficult for companies in China to achieve the same level of success they would if that same company was in the US. And so, is what it is. The last thing that I said, the biggest loser, was I made a comment about real estate developers and investors who need short-term cash flow. So I mentioned people who were, especially in commercial real estate, and kind of money naturally flowing away from commercial real estate into bonds. I think, again, this was kind of an obvious bet. It's not especially crazy, but I would say that I overestimated it. In practice, real estate has held up better than I would have expected, certainly better than I expressed. There are definitely areas that have been hurt a lot, like this commercial real estate. I did mention people who are buying and holding long-term won't be affected in this regard, and that's typically true. But you have, on the other hand, seen, for example, in Toronto, they've had a bunch of issues where builders, because there's not buyers, because there's not interest rates that are affordable, have just stopped construction, and there's whole contract stuff around that. So I don't know. I would give myself a failing grade on that prediction, but not totally off base. So you can kind of take it as it is. So anyway, generally, reasonably balanced. I think I did okay. And so check your own. Let me know in the comments below, and we'll see about doing some other predictions. But I'd love to hear your predictions for the coming year, what it is that you think will happen. And I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.